The tripartite alliance is on rocky ground again. This time over Finance Minister Tito Mboweni's economic strategy paper. It was made public on Tuesday and didn't take long for the SACP and COSATU to slam the proposals and call for its withdrawal. The communists also claim that the economic plan flouts the ANC's election manifesto.
A growing chorus of rejection of the National Treasury's economic recovery plan. On Thursday, the Trade Union Federation COSATU rallied against Mboweni's strategy to grow the economy.
We are saying the Minister of Finance must withdraw that paper. That's our message. And that paper must find a discussion at NETLEC.
The SACP is siding with its worker ally and insists they had not been consulted.
That paper contains proposals that contradict our commitments in the manifesto. We took that manifesto to the people. We are loyal to our people. We cannot take the manifesto to the people and then come back and introduce policies that roll back the provisions of that manifesto.
Among the sticking points, the contentious minimum wage.
All of a sudden, here comes our Minister of Finance telling us that other companies must be allowed to pay wages below the minimum wage. What is that thing? It is going to make a mockery of our movement, and our movement must not accept that thing.
Speaking on the sidelines of a seminar focused on state capture, Mashilo told the SABC that the party also supported Parliament's moves to prop the fitness of the public protector to hold office.
The public protector has to be held to account for the damning findings arrived at by our courts of law. Parliament must perform its work, but that work must be performed in terms of fair procedures, and its conclusion must be substantively fair. That work has to take place, and we welcome it.
The Communist Party also wants investigations and prosecutions related to the State Capture Commission to be fast-tracked. Manqoba Mchunu, SABC News, Johannesburg.
The South African Federation of Trade Unions has also rejected Finance Minister Tito Mboweni's economic strategy. It says the plan is essentially a rehash of all the previously failed economic strategies that have crippled economic growth. And to tell us more, we're joined in studio by the SAFTU General Secretary, Zwelinzima Vavi. Mr. Vavi, it's always a pleasure having you in studio. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mpu, and thanks for having us.
You say that the Minister Mboweni's plan rehashes all the other, economic policies that have crippled the country's economy. What do you mean by this?
From 1989 up to now, 2019, we have been on the same road. The start was the FW de Klerk regime when it introduced what they call the normative economic model, what they call the NEM. And thereafter, we went to the World Bank with the backing power through de Klerk again in 1993, and there were conditions that were attached to that $850 loan we got. Then we introduced on our own without anybody forcing us, because we believe that the Derek Key's program was correct. We introduced something that was called the growth, employment and redistribution. Exactly the same style, no negotiation with anybody, introduced as non-negotiable. Then we introduced something called the accelerated shared growth. Then the initial development plan. From the beginning up to the end, none of those things have worked. Look at all of their names, shared growth. Where was growth? Where was sharing of that growth? Redistribution. Where was redistribution? The only distribution that have happened is from the poor to the rich, through paying more VAT taxes, through more what they call I can't remember now the term, but there's more taxes for cigarettes, more taxes for liquor, more taxes for fuel, and more taxes for everything, all of whom have to be paid proportionately by the
But which are some of the significant facets or the elements of this plan that you're poking holes in?
This is neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is have a belief that markets must drive growth. And secondly, that everything that we produce in the country must be exported to foreign markets. This particular strategy is based on this export strategy, despite everything else that is happening in the world. Look at what is happening to the rest of the development world currencies. They are plummeting. Ours was 13 rands a few weeks ago. It's now around 15 rand. There's absolute chaos as a result of Trump trade wars with China. And the whole of the African economy is depressed. And look at everything is depressed. And yet somebody stands there saying, ignore all of that. We're going to drive growth in South Africa through exporting everybody elsewhere. Then he launches a tax on labor as usual, which is the old advice he gets from the capitalist friend who blame the very victims of these failed economic strategies. So he suddenly says there must be special economic zones like Kucha, where labor rights are going to be undermined, where there's going to be deregulations, left, right, and center. And then he says the national minimum wage, which SAFTU already rejected as a poverty minimum wage, as an entrenchment of the apartheid and colonial wage structure. He says, no, that's too much. The 3,500 is too much. There must be a layer of so-called small, medium, macro enterprises, which it doesn't look at any factors behind it. It doesn't look at their revenues. It doesn't look at their profitability levels. It just says there must be a blanket exemptions for all of them. Okay. All of which basically are attempts to basically say the poor in society must be the one who must bear the brunt for failed economic policies that have been tried and tested, but dismally failed the black majority from 1989, when F.W. de Klerk was still the president of a minority.
And speaking of the black majority, I mean, one unit of the Tripartite Alliance, the SACP, says that this particular plan turns its back on the ANC's election manifesto, which will benefit a broad-based, majority of black people. You share the same sentiments?
Except that the SACP and COSATU will be asking workers to vote for the continuation of the same come next elections. That's why I don't take them seriously anymore. I mean, there's a point where you say repeating the same thing over and over again and hoping that something is going to be different to the mistakes that you have committed in the past is a sign of insanity. And I think that both the proposals of Minister Tito Mboweni, as well as the response from both SACP and COSATU, to me, is a repetition of the old. We were dancing in that floor, Chief, for years. We were hoping that every time we change this leader in favor of this one, something better is going to emerge. No, nothing have changed. What the SACP asked workers to vote for in the last elections was neoliberalism, was privatization. And Tito Mboweni is doing something not different, really, to what is already being implemented. All he is asking for is the doubling up of the dossier that have dismally failed. Look at the catastrophic levels of everything: poverty, unemployment, inequality. And how could anybody who is in his right mind not say, look, guys, we've tried this thing. We have been into this framework since 1989. It's over 30 years now of austerity programs, of neoliberalism, of this stupid belief that the markets on their own will just tend the magic and get the economy to grow with little involvement or active participation of the state, which must develop capacity, of course, and which must begin to take up activities to count in private investment.
Mr. Vavi,
so that we can grow the economy.
You strike me as an armchair critic. You don't have a solutionist approach to all matters affecting South Africans. For instance, you boycotted the President Ramaphosa's Job Summit in October last year because you argued that the government and the constituencies forming part of NEDLAC do not appreciate the scale that corruption, that poverty, for instance, have in South Africa. What are some of the issues that you want the government to adopt in order to make sure that growth of the economy is achieved? What is it that should be done?
We couldn't find our way to the President's Job Summit because we were invited about 2 weeks before it was held. After many months of them and their sweethearts sitting behind the backs of workers and behind closed curtains, negotiating deals above the heads of workers. And so when we eventually briefed to, at the last moment, please come, and we asked, what is inside here? And we got
the logistics aside, but the principle. I'm talking about the principle.
You never ever want to participate in a forum whose products have already been ironed out in the negotiations that we're not involved, we're not part of. And that's why we felt that we will not participate in that discussion. Secondly, we knew at that moment, when we look at the framework of so-called 700 agreements that have been reached, that all of these agreements are reached within the parameters of a neoliberal framework that has already failed the workers of this country and the poor. That's a very important second point. But then there's a third point where I think that you are making an unfair criticism to SAFTU. If you read the statement that we have made, if you look at the statement that have been issued by our National Executive Committee about 7 days ago now, you will see very strong practical alternative policy proposals to what have been tried that have dismally failed the people of this country. We're starting to say
which are some of these proposals?
Let's go to few of them. We're saying, firstly, you have to appreciate the scale of the crisis that we are finding ourselves. 2/3 of the population in poverty. Almost 40% of the population in unemployment. More than 56% of the youth in unemployment, and so forth and so forth. So we say, respond appropriately. Put on the table a stimulus package that is big, that is capable of kickstarting the economy. And so we propose at least put on the table 500 billion rands that will help you to restart the infrastructure program and to begin to make specific interventions in relation to how you support the small, medium, macro enterprises. And people will say, where will 500 billion rands come from? And we list the proposals of where that money can come from. Firstly, we say, for years, we have been dodging the issue of the wealth tax in the country. People like Professor Sambi Terre Blanche left this world agitating the country unsuccessfully to say we have to embrace the proposal that the Germans found it so appropriate at the time of the unity between the East and the West. We're saying, please introduce that in South Africa. Secondly, we're saying, pass a special legislation on non-compliance with our tax laws, on those who are dodging their responsibility to the tax person, the multi-billions of rands who leave our country illicitly into offshore through mispricing and all manner of tax dodging schemes. So we say, do something about that. And thirdly, there is about 2 trillion rands sitting in cash in the back pockets of the multi-billionaires in the country. We're saying tax that money, but tax it in such a manner that you can put some rewards, give them something. Those who are willing to invest in the productive sectors of the economy, give them something so that you are encouraging them. And out
sure
of all of that, you've got your 500 billion rands.
Sure.
You can kickstart your economy.
Right.
You can industrialize again. You can prioritize South Africa's manufacturing sector again.
Given the current state of the employment crisis in the country, I'm sure you will appreciate that in the medium to long term, the bulk of the employment figures will come from small business. And Mr. Mboweni's plan, strategy, exempts small business from certain regulations, such as the bargaining council agreements, which were previously enjoyed by big business and labour. Surely this must have been flagged as a wise move by the minister.
Again, this is when you are sitting in the ivory towers and you really don't know what is happening on the ground. you follow the ideology of the neoliberals about what is the crisis facing the small, medium, macro enterprises in South Africa. There are three issues that are impacting on the growth of the small, medium, macro enterprises in South Africa. The first one is not labor laws, is not regulations. The first one is the fact that these people have no access to affordable financing. That's the first biggest problem that is facing black people who are trying to venture into business. The second one is that they have no market for the products that they produce. Because the third problem, the existence of monopolies who have shut up the space in Soweto.
What about the exemption, though, of these bargaining council agreements?
They don't even mention that as a big problem because they know that within the current existing bargaining system, you can exempt, you can apply for exemption. And the last time I checked, 80% plus of people who apply for exemptions get them from the bargaining council. Mm-hmm. So why would you list that as your biggest problem unless you are so ill-informed about the realities facing the economy?
Mm-hmm. Now, Mr. Vavi, he also makes mention of relaxed visa requirements to make it easier for tourists to visit South Africa. Now, tourism, of course, has the potential of creating over 2 million jobs in the next decade. As a matter of fact, in the recently concluded Africa Tourism Leadership Forum in Durban, it was tourism was flouted as, one medium that will grow the economy. I mean, looking at South Africa as a melting pot of culture and flora and fauna with a picturesque landscape, it is a vehicle for economic growth.
Absolutely. That one, he is spot on. And how I wish that government can speak in one voice in relation to that. Who remembers or who will forget the fiasco within government between the minister, the wars between the Minister of Tourism, then Derek Hanegom, and the Minister of Home Affairs, Malusi Gigaba, where one hand simply didn't know what the other hand was doing. And they worked against each other and against the goal of ensuring that tourism becomes one of the growth points for South Africa. So any proposals that says relax the regulations, make it easy for people of the world to visit this country and to explore all that it can offer is something that is absolutely welcome.
Yeah, and the reviewing of the fuel price regulation and passing on the benefits of the spot price benchmark to the consumers, I'm sure you will appreciate the exorbitant price of fuel in South Africa.
Because, again, that's let's see what he's going to say in his budget speech. Because one of the reasons why we are unable to live in the country is because in his speeches, contrary to these proposals, he will always look at the fuel tax as a stopgap measure to address the fiscal crisis that is facing South Africa. So if that can be done, it will be absolutely something that we can talk to him about, including exploring using the fuel levy to pay for these e-tolls that they introduced, which he still champions, by the way. But there's something very important that we have not spoken about here, simply. Here is the Minister of Finance. He knows that he has been the minister. By the way, we are told that he found this document there, have been drafted by the technocrats with the assistance of the IMF and the World Bank, and it has been lying there gathering dust, and he has guts. He picks it up and he owns it and he publishes it. Everything that is spoken into that document have absolutely nothing to do with the portfolio that it should be driving, the portfolio of macroeconomic policy, that in particular have driven this economy to its doldrums, to lack of growth and now to declines in our GDP. But he have guts and gall to instruct other departments and of what they should do, and how arrogant, how undermining to the rest of the other departments of government to be told by some bureaucrats unelected in the Department of Treasury and who undermine everybody from DTI, from small, medium businesses to tourism. Everybody suddenly, there is some kind of a prime minister, not appointed, of course, just walked into the shoes of that position without any anointing. And we find that exactly the same way as gear was introduced in 1996. It was exactly the same level of arrogance, and this. We know it all. We know what is good for the country. Everybody else doesn't know what they are appointed to in government. Absolutely silly.
Now, the proverbial elephant in the room, Eskom, he suggests the unbundling of Eskom and the purchasing of power from independent power producers. Now, Eskom is one entity that we certainly cannot afford to let go. I mean, despite the government pumping in billions and billions of rand into Eskom, despite all its nonsense, we certainly cannot let it go.
And he even proposed that we should sell all of the coal-powered stations or power generation, which is basically what they have been denying. They have been denying, and we have said this from the beginning, that this whole talk about unbundling of Eskom, this introduction of the IPPs that are being subsidized by Eskom, and now this suggestion that we must sell the coal power generation is all part and parcel of a very carefully crafted strategy to collapse Eskom and then to give it over to its to the friends.
He comes up with a plan about Eskom. What is your plan?
No. We have a better plan.
Which is?
For example, we're saying that we ought to begin a discussion in South Africa about how do we save the Eskom, because we know if Eskom can collapse, the entire economy of South Africa will collapse with Eskom. It's not something that any worker or any citizen that is thinking can wish
what
that
would your
it can
plan be
happen.
then?
Secondly, government 59 billion rands, which is a funding for the next 3 years, is not a solution because government is so close to a fiscal cliff. It cannot continue to provide those reliefs to Eskom and to NEL, to SABC, to SAA. And that's why we say the trade union movement must take responsibility and start a discussion that was started right in 1994, but that was abandoned because of the levels of corruption in the state. Okay. And that discussion is about what should be the role of our pensions as workers, our provident funds, to develop South Africa and to save these collapsed state-owned enterprises.
Okay.
And that discussion is a very important discussion because it's a discussion that says, should our investments, our lifetime investments, only be used to build glass buildings in Sandton when we live in squalor in Alexander and in Soweto? Should we not begin to go back to the discussion or to some of the strategies that were implemented by even the apartheid regime? You remember they had a prescribed investment of 10% of all investment. And so we argue two issues. Firstly, we're saying within the current regulation, Regulation 28, for example, it allows all provident funds to invest in what they call unlisted investment. Outside the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, you can explore possibilities of spending 10%. Okay. And yet, in South Africa today, only the PIC and Eskom are spending those amounts of money in the unlisted investment. The rest are spending 1 to 2%. That's the first possibility we think must be explored. The second one, the government employee pension scheme is a guaranteed scheme. It means that any worker that is in government have a guaranteed proportion that after their years of working, they're going to receive a particular proportion, irrespective of the investment decisions of the PIC and all of that. And as a result of that, there are billions that are sitting idling in the government employee pension fund. And we're saying we must have a discussion about whether we cannot have that discussion in a manner that is not going to undermine whatsoever the investments that workers have made in their provident funds and pension funds. So we think that that's where the discussion should be.
Right.
Not on privatization of Eskom.
Zwelinzima Vavi, Secretary General of South African Federation of Trade Unions, we thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
We appreciate it.
Yeah.